If you truly want to understand what someone is drawn to, do not watch them during the day. Watch where they go at night. During the day, most people are just following obligations. They go to work. They attend classes. They buy groceries. They answer emails. They sit in traffic. They do the things life requires from them. But nighttime is different. At night, people make choices. When the world gets quiet, when the streets empty out, when most people are asleep, the people still moving around are usually going somewhere because they want to. And the people who see that side of humanity more than almost anyone else are taxi drivers. Taxi drivers witness people in their most unfiltered state. One driver once said, "When you are awake while the rest of the world is sleeping, it changes how you see people." And he was right. Night shift drivers often say passengers become more honest after midnight. Maybe it is because the car is dark. Maybe it is because the silence feels too heavy. Maybe it is because the person in the front seat feels like a stranger they will never see again. So people talk. They confess. They cry. They say things they would never say under daylight. One taxi driver remembered picking up a man who looked like he was carrying electricity under his skin. The man got into the back seat, made eye contact through the rearview mirror, and could barely sit still. He kept rubbing his hands against his legs, breathing fast, like something life-changing was about to happen. The driver asked where he was going. The man was on his way to propose to the woman he loved. It was beautiful in a strange way. A nervous man, a quiet taxi, a ring somewhere in his pocket, and the city passing by outside the window. The driver dropped him off and wished him luck. A few rides later, the same man got back into the taxi. This time, the destination was a bar. She had said no. Same man, same night. Two completely different versions of a life. That is what taxi drivers see. Not magic, not psychic visions, just people before and after the moment everything changes. Another driver spoke about a woman who got into his cab and cried silently the entire ride. No loud sobbing, no explanation, just tears falling in the back seat. When the ride ended, she stepped out and said only one thing. "Thank you for not asking." Then she walked away. Another passenger, a finance executive, got into a taxi around 2 o'clock in the morning and admitted that the driver was the first person he had actually spoken to in months. He did not talk to his wife. He barely spoke
Are the
to his
allegations
children.
true?
He had no real friends.
Do
His
you have
work
a statement
conversations
regarding
were
the charges?
mostly emails.
Look this way.
And
Why
there,
are you
in
hiding?
the back of a taxi, he finally said it out loud. Night taxis also have a smell. It is usually perfume, cologne, alcohol, cold air, food, leather seats, and disinfectant. People going out at night often spray too much fragrance, like they're trying to cover up the whole day before stepping into another life. But for one taxi driver in South Korea, one night smelled different. It smelled like fried chicken. He was working the night shift when the door opened and a young woman climbed into the back seat. She was beautiful, around 20 years old, and carrying 2 large takeout bags filled with fried chicken. The smell filled the cab instantly. The driver noticed her outfit right away, though he tried not to stare. It was cold outside, but she was wearing a very low-cut top that seemed completely wrong for the weather. She had just come from a motel, carrying enough fried chicken for several people. Then she spoke. "Hurry, sir. Drive fast. Someone is chasing me. I'll pay cash." The driver reacted by instinct. He stepped on the gas. But something about her behavior did not match her words. If someone was truly being chased, they would usually look frightened. They would keep turning around. They would check the windows. They would ask if anyone was behind them. But she did none of that. Instead, she leaned back, relaxed, and took in the smell of the fried chicken like she had just escaped inconvenience, not danger. Then she took out her phone, snapped a picture, and started typing with the faintest smirk on her face. The driver kept watching the road, scanning for a car behind them, trying to understand what was happening. Was someone following her? Was she in danger? Was he now part of something dangerous too? But the whole time, the smell of fried chicken kept filling the car, making the entire situation feel even stranger. Later, the driver could not stop thinking about that ride. It was not the wildest passenger he had ever had. It was not the loudest, drunkest, or most dramatic. But something about it bothered him. Her fear seemed performed. Her calmness seemed real. The contradiction stayed in his mind. He even started making up explanations. Maybe she only said someone was chasing her because she wanted him to drive fast. Maybe she was worried the chicken would get cold. Maybe if she had just said, "Please hurry, I want to eat this while it's hot," he would not have taken her seriously. So she invented danger. That was the harmless explanation. Then one day he turned on the news, and there she was, the same woman, the woman from his taxi, the woman with the fried chicken. She was being called one of South Korea's newest female serial killers. And online, some people were saying she was too pretty to go to prison. This case involves allegations of intentional drugging, manipulation, robbery, and murder. It also involves discussions of dating culture, motel rooms, prescription medication, and vulnerable victims. Every person discussed should be treated carefully, and everyone accused is presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. Some details have been translated and summarized for clarity. To understand this case, you first have to understand the world she moved through. In South Korea, running clubs have become a huge social trend. If you search for running groups online, you will find thousands of young people meeting up in parks, city streets, and organized events. Clothing brands host running crews. Local communities organize games. Some groups even arrange adult versions of cops and robbers, where people in their 20s and 30s chase each other through parks at night. It sounds strange if you're not used to it. A message might say, "Cops and robbers tonight at 8 p.m. adults only. Fust runners welcome." And people actually show up. Because for many young Koreans, meeting people has become difficult. In formal settings, there could be pressure around age, job, income, family background, and social status. But in a running group, nobody needs to ask those questions immediately. You just run. You chase. You laugh. You meet strangers without the weight of everything else. Another way young singles meet is through something called a hunting bar. A hunting bar is basically a singles bar designed for approaching strangers. Tables are arranged around a central space. Groups of men and women move from table to table, asking if they can join. It is normal there, expected even. It is like dating apps brought into real life. You meet someone, drink, talk, maybe move to another bar afterward, and if there is chemistry, maybe you meet again. But that is also the problem. You are meeting complete strangers. You do not know their history. You do not know what they want. You do not know what they are hiding. And in one small part of Seoul, several men started having extremely strange experiences after meeting women through nightlife spaces like these. At first, none of them knew each other. They were not friends. They did not work together. They had no reason to compare stories. But each of them had gone on a date with a young woman, and each came away feeling deeply disturbed. Not just disappointed, not just annoyed, disturbed. One man, who we will call Adam, met a 22-year-old woman and ended up spending more than $200 on a single date. Paying was not the part that bothered him most. What bothered him was that she never said thank you. Not once. She let him pay for everything while texting another man the entire time. Another man, Ben, said his date felt like a walking contradiction. She claimed to be 25, but looked younger. She lied about small things that made no sense. When he asked her height, she said 5 feet 4 inches, even though she was clearly much taller. It was not a flattering lie. It was not useful. It was just random. She ordered expensive food, barely ate it, kept adding dishes, and never offered to pay. She wore extremely revealing clothing despite the freezing weather. When he suggested she zip her jacket so she would not get cold, she became irritated and unzipped it again. Another man took a woman to the beach after she said romantically that she wanted to see the ocean. Once they got there, she claimed she had no money. He paid for everything: food, drinks, snacks. Then at a convenience store, she began adding personal items to the bill: detergent, vitamins, hygiene products, lip balm, face masks, skincare. Another man went on a date where the woman suddenly began opening up about her painful childhood, her abusive father, and her suffering. Then, when he tried to end the date politely, she began coughing dramatically and saying her chest felt tight. He took her to a clinic, then to a pharmacy, where she tried to add extra items onto the medication bill. Another man left his wallet on the table during a restaurant date. In South Korea, that is not unusual. People often leave phones, bags, and wallets on tables to hold their seats. Theft is uncommon in many public places because CCTV is everywhere. But when he came back from the restroom, all the cash in his wallet was gone. The woman denied knowing anything. Then they checked the security footage. She had taken it, and she stood there watching herself on camera, as if daring him to do something about it. Another man said should have seen the warning signs immediately. Before they even met, the woman sent him a list of restaurants she wanted to visit. Every single one was expensive. During the date, she talked constantly about food: meat, chicken, pork belly, beef, Western food, anything expensive. They ate multiple full meals, and at the end, she asked him to buy her more food to take home. The strangest part was not just the money. It was her obsession with consuming. Food, attention, gifts, convenience, whatever she could get. Soon, these men would discover something horrifying. They had not gone on separate bad dates. They had all met the same woman. And police would later accuse that woman of killing men she met through dates. At first, none of them connected the dots. Bad dates happen all the time. Awkward conversations, strange personalities, people who seem completely different from how they presented themselves online. Most people just move on and forget. But this was different. These stories did not just feel awkward. They felt wrong. And then came Sam. Sam was not just casually dating. He was at a stage in life where he was thinking seriously about the future. He was a chef, saving money every month with the goal of opening his own restaurant. He had discipline, routine, direction. When he started talking to this woman, he felt something different. Their conversations seemed natural. She appeared thoughtful, engaging, someone he could actually see himself building something with. So he prepared. Before the date, he even searched online for advice: what to say, how to make a good impression, how to keep the conversation flowing. He wanted to go well. But while he was doing that, she was searching something very different. Her searches included questions like, what is a lethal dose of sleeping pills? What happens if you mix sleeping pills with alcohol? Can someone die from it? And she was not just searching, she was taking notes. While he was preparing for a date, she was preparing for something else entirely. That same night, they met. And eventually, like many couples who meet through nightlife in South Korea, they went to a motel. Now, motels in South Korea are not exactly what people in other countries might imagine. They are not necessarily sketchy or isolated. They are everywhere, near clubs, karaoke spots, busy nightlife areas. People use them for privacy, convenience, or simply because they live with family. It is normal. Couples go there. Friends rent rooms to hang out. Travelers stay overnight. It is not automatically suspicious. But that night, something went wrong. When police arrived at the motel room later, the scene did not look violent. There were no signs of a struggle, no visible injuries, no broken furniture, no blood. A young man lay on the bed on his side, completely still. At first glance, It almost looked like he had fallen asleep. But he was dead. The only noticeable detail was subtle. Vomit near his mouth, slight swelling, signs that something had gone wrong internally rather than externally. On the nightstand sat a bottle, a hangover recovery drink. In South Korea, these are common. You can buy them at convenience stores. People drink them after alcohol to reduce hangover symptoms. They are harmless. At least they're supposed to be. Police check his phone. There was a long message waiting. It was from a woman he had been with. The message was unusual. It went into excessive detail, almost like a written explanation of events. She said she suddenly got her period and could not stay the night. She said he had given her money for a taxi. She said they had ordered fried chicken. She described how he fell asleep while watching a movie. She explained how she tried to wake him, but he wanted to keep sleeping. She said he told her to eat the food alone and take it home. She said she felt lonely eating by herself, so she left. She thanked him. She said they should go out to eat next time. It did not read like a normal message. It read like someone carefully documenting events, almost like a report. Then there was another message, a photo from inside a taxi. She repeated the same explanation, period, cramps, taxi ride. Thank you for the money. Thank you for the food. Too much detail. Too structured. Too intentional. Police began asking questions. The motel staff confirmed that the man had arrived with a woman. They seemed normal, not overly drunk, not arguing. At some point, fried chicken was delivered. Shortly after that, the woman left alone. And now the man was dead. The body was sent for examination. The results were shocking. His system contained a mixture of drugs, multiple antidepressants, sleeping pills, sedatives, and other medications. Not just one or two. A combination. A cocktail. The amount was extreme. Dozens of pills worth of substances. Doctors explained that these were not recreational drugs. These are prescription medications typically used for depression or sleep disorders. The victim had no prescription for them. He should not have had them in his body at all, and certainly not in that quantity. At that moment, investigators realized something critical. This was not an accident, and it was not the first time. Just 11 days earlier, another young man had been found dead in a nearly identical situation. Motel room. No signs of struggle. Drug cocktail in his system. A woman who had been with him shortly before his death. Now, there were two, and that meant something far worse. This was not a one-time incident. This was a pattern. Police began searching for connections, and then they found someone who had survived. A man who had been hospitalized after collapsing. He had been unconscious for 2 days. When he woke up, he remembered almost nothing. Just one detail. He had been with his girlfriend. She gave him a drink. A herbal fatigue remedy, she said. After that, everything went black. He woke up in a hospital bed. Doctors told him he could have died. He texted her afterward. "What did you give me?" She never answered. When police showed him surveillance images from the motel cases, he recognized her immediately. It was the same woman, his girlfriend. Her name was Kim Soyoung. She was 20 years old. Police moved quickly after that. They found her. She was not hiding. She had been posting selfies online just minutes before her arrest. Smiling, posing, living normally, as if nothing had happened. When they brought her in for questioning, she did not deny giving the men drugs. But her explanation was chilling. She said she did not want conflict. She claimed that when men spent money on her during dates, she assumed they expected intimacy afterward. She said she did not want that. So, instead of confronting them, she drugged them. She said she only wanted them to fall asleep so she could leave. She claimed she did not know they would die. But investigators already knew that was not the full truth. Because this was not random. This was methodical. She had a system. She would collect prescription drugs by visiting multiple clinics, what some call doctor shopping. She would gather different medications, crush them, mix them into hangover drinks, and carry them in her bag. When she met a man, She would offer the drink casually. A kind gesture. Here, this helps with hangovers. They trusted her. They drank it. And then, their bodies would shut down. Some passed out and survived. Others never woke up. And then there was something else. Something that disturbed investigators even more than the killings. Her behavior during and after the crimes. She showed no urgency, no panique, no fear. In one case, after drugging a man in a motel room, while he was dying on the bed, she used his phone to order food. A massive order. Fried chicken, rice, sauces, drinks, side dishes. Enough food for multiple people. She waited in the room, not to help him, not to call for help, but to receive the delivery. The delivery driver later described the moment. He expected a loud room, maybe a group of friends. Instead, it was silent, too quiet. She opened the door, expressionless, took the food, closed the door. Inside the room, a man was dying, and she was focused on eating. By now, the country was starting to realize this was not just another crime story. This was something far more disturbing, because the deeper investigators looked, the worse it got. Once Kim Soyoung was in custody, police began retracing every possible incident connected to her. And what they found showed that the deaths were not sudden or accidental. They were part of a pattern that had been building for months. October 25th, 2025. A restaurant in Gangnam. A man is sitting at a table with Kim Soyoung. They're drinking wine. Nothing unusual. Just another date. At some point, he collapses. His head falls forward onto the table. At first, no one reacts. People assume he is just drunk. It happens. But minutes pass. Then more minutes. 30 minutes later, he is still in the same position. A staff member approaches. Is he okay? Soyoung responds calmly. He's just drunk. But something feels off. The staff checks the table. Only 2 glasses of wine had been ordered, and the man's glass was barely touched. The situation did not match the explanation. Eventually, emergency services were called. He survived. Barely. Then December 14th, 2025. A bakery parking lot. A man is sitting in a car with his girlfriend. Kim Soyoung. She gives him a drink. She says it is for fatigue, something to help him feel better. He drinks it. Within minutes, everything fades. He collapses. He does not wake up for 2 days. Doctors later say he was extremely lucky to survive. After he wakes up, confused and disoriented, he texts her. What did you put in that drink? No response. Then January 24th, 2026. A karaoke room. Another date. Another man. Private room, drinks, music. Then suddenly, he collapses, completely unresponsive. Soyoung calls emergency services again, acting confused. I just met him. I don't know what's wrong. Staff later say she tried to leave without him. Policy required that no one leave a companion behind in that condition. She was forced to stay until help arrived. He survived, but barely. And then came the 2 cases that turned everything into a full investigation. The motel deaths. Same method, same setup, same ending. The pattern was undeniable. And once police searched her home, everything became even clearer. They found evidence of preparation. Hangover drinks. Multiple bottles. Some clean, some tampered with. Inside her kitchen, they discovered traces of crushed pills. She had been grinding prescription medications, antidepressants, sedatives, antihistamines, and mixing them into the drinks. Carefully, deliberately. She was not improvising. She was experimenting. Her journal confirmed it. Short, cold notes. Dose too low. Didn't work. Increase next time. There was no emotion in those entries. No guilt. No hosetashin. Just observation. Adjustment. Repetition. It was not about one person. It was about control. About testing limits. About seeing what would happen. And there was something else that stood out in every case. Food. Every single date involved excessive ordering, large quantities, expensive meals, additional items that made no sense. Even when the victim was already struggling to stay conscious, she kept ordering, adding more, consuming more. It was not just eating, it was obsession. In one of the most disturbing moments uncovered by investigators, after one of the victims had already lost consciousness in the motel room, she stayed, not to help, not to leave, but to wait for food delivery. When the driver arrived, he described the scene as deeply unsettling. The room was silent. No music, no conversation, no movement, just her, standing there, expression completely blank. She took the food, closed the door, and inside, a man was dying. That detail alone changed how many people saw the case, because it showed something beyond impulsive behavior. It showed detachment, a complete lack of connection to what was happening. As the investigation became public, reactions started pouring in, and not all of them were what you would expect. At first, many people online focused on her appearance. Photos from her social media spread rapidly. Comments flooded in. She's too pretty to be a killer. There must be more to the story. Maybe the men did something first. It was a disturbing wave of sympathy, not based on facts, but on perception. Some people even tried to justify her actions, saying she was protecting herself, avoiding confrontation, tried to escape uncomfortable situations. But experts pushed back hard. Even if her intention had only been to sedate someone, one sleeping pill would have been enough. Not dozens, not a mixture of multiple drugs, not a lethal cocktail, and definitely not repeated over and over again. Then more details about her past started emerging. Her childhood was unstable. Her father was abusive, violent, unpredictable. He would come home drunk, attack the family, create chaos in the house. Eventually, he left. Her mother worked constantly to support the family. There were signs of trauma. Doctors later confirmed she had been treated for PTSD, but that did not explain the level of calculation in her actions. Former classmates began sharing stories. She had a pattern of stealing small things, wallets, accessories, personal items. If something went missing, she was often involved, and when confronted, her reactions were strange, detached, almost indifferent. At one point, a classmate tracked down stolen AirPods being sold online. When they met the seller, it was her. When confronted, she simply asked, "Do you want them back or not?" No apology, no fear, just indifference. Other people described her as manipulative, creating tension between co-workers, lying unnecessarily, taking things without reason. It was not one isolated trait. It was a pattern. And then came the shift. When authorities finally released her official images, her mugshot, the reaction changed instantly. The same people who had been defending her based on filtered social media photos now reacted differently. She looks completely different. This can't be the same person. It's all filters. The narrative flipped. Support turned into criticism. But the damage was already done. Because for a moment, the focus had not been on the victims. It had been on her appearance. And that alone raised serious questions about how people process crimes like this. Meanwhile, inside custody, she began writing letters, long messages to journalists, trying to explain herself, trying to control the narrative. In those letters, she portrayed herself as a victim, said she was scared, said she regretted everything, said she only wanted to protect herself. But the tone was inconsistent, shifting between guilt, self-pity, and deflection. At times, she would express regret. At others, she would focus entirely on her own suffering, not the victims, not their families, just herself. When asked directly why she did it, she returned to the same explanation: fear. avoidance, no intention to kill. But by then, the evidence was overwhelming. The preparation, the repeated pattern, the dosage increases, the research, the backup bottles. None of it aligned with a spontaneous act. It was calculated, step by step. And now, she was facing trial. 2 counts of murder, multiple counts of attempted murder, violation of narcotics laws, the possibility of life in prison, and perhaps the most disturbing part of all, even at that stage, she still seemed more concerned about herself than anything else. The food in prison, the conditions, her own fear, not the lives that were lost, not the people who never woke up, just herself. And that leaves one question that still unsettles people. Was this about money, control, curiosity, or something far more difficult to define? Because in the end, she did not gain much. No million, no long-term benefit, just food, small amounts of money, and a series of lives destroyed, which makes it harder to understand. And sometimes, the hardest cases to understand are the ones that stay with you the longest. By the time the case reached its peak, it was no longer just about what she did. It became about how people reacted to it, because the reaction itself was almost as disturbing as the crime. At one point, a post started circulating online. A man was asking a serious question. Would it really be so bad to become pen pals with her? He argued that she was attractive, that dating someone like her normally would be impossible. But if she ended up in prison for life, then maybe, just maybe, he could write to her, send her money, visit her. He even compared it to a previous relationship he had with an inmate. Except this time, he reasoned, she would never leave him. It was not a joke. It was not satire. And it gained attention. That was when many people realized something had gone deeply wrong. Not just with the case, but with how it was being processed by the public. As more information came out, online forums exploded with debates. Some people were angry. Some were confused. Some were still trying to justify her behavior. But then authorities finally released her official identity. Her real name, her age, her unfiltered image. And something shifted instantly. The same people who had been calling her the prettiest killer alive suddenly changed their tone. Now, they were saying, this can't be the same person. Those photos were edited. She looks completely different. And just like that, the sympathy faded, replaced by something else. Judgment, mockery, criticism. It exposed something uncomfortable. For a moment, many people had ignored the severity of the crime because of how she looked online. And when that illusion broke, so did their support. At the same time, her letters from detention continued. Long, emotional messages sent to journalists. In them, she talked about her childhood, her trauma, her fears. She described moments from her past where she felt she should have died. She repeated the same idea over and over. That everything would have been easier if she had just disappeared earlier in life. At first glance, it sounded like regret. But the more people read, the more it felt different. Because the focus was always the same. Her pain, her fear, her suffering. Not the victims, not the families, not the consequences. Just her. And when journalists pressed her for a clear answer, why did you do it? She returned to her original claim. She said she was afraid that the men would pressure her, afraid of confrontation, afraid of losing control of the situation. So she chose to drug them, to make them fall asleep, to leave without conflict. But investigators had already uncovered the truth. The messages between her and the victims told a different story. In many cases, she was the one pushing for the motel, insisting on it, repeatedly. She created the situation, and then claimed she was escaping from it. It was not fear. It was setup. And then there was the detail that made her explanation almost impossible to believe. She carried multiple bottles, one clean, one poisoned. After drugging a victim, she would leave the clean bottle behind. So, if police tested it later, it would show nothing. That is not something someone does in panic. That is something someone prepares for, plans for, anticipates. And that level of preparation changes everything. Because it removes doubt. It removes ambiguity. It shows intent. At that point, even those who had tried to defend her began to step back. But the anger did not stop there. It shifted toward the authorities. Because after the first confirmed death, police had already identified her as a person of interest. They had CCTV footage. They had her connection to the case. And yet, they did not act immediately. They scheduled an interview, gave her time, and in that time, another person died. That detail alone sparked outrage. Because it meant the second death might have been preventable. Families of the victims spoke out, frustrated, devastated. They were not just grieving the loss. They were questioning the system that failed to stop it sooner. At the same time, another issue was unfolding. Her identity. In South Korea, releasing a suspect's identity is not automatic. There are strict conditions. The crime must be severe. The evidence must be clear. There must be public interest. And the method must be considered brutal. And this is where controversy exploded. Prosecutors initially argued that the killings were not brutal enough. There were no visible injuries, no physical violence, no obvious signs of struggle. So they hesitated. But the public strongly disagreed. Because what is more disturbing? A visible act of violence? Or a quiet, invisible one? A death that comes suddenly, without warning, from something as simple as a drink? The victims' families were furious. They argued that the absence of visible violence did not make it less brutal. If anything, it made it worse, because the victims never had a chance to defend themselves. Eventually, under public pressure, authorities released her identity. But by then, the damage had already been done, because the narrative had already been shaped, first by appearance, then by speculation, and only later by facts. Inside detention, her behavior continued to raise questions. She complained about the food, said sometimes she refused to eat because it was not good enough. Even that detail stood out, because throughout the investigation, food had been a constant theme, an obsession, large orders, excessive consumption, a focus that never seemed to match the situation. Even in the most critical moments, food came first. And now, even in custody, it still did. Experts analyzing the case began to suggest a different perspective. That this was not about money in the traditional sense, not about survival, not about desperation, but about control, about treating people as objects, testing reactions, pushing limits, and discarding them when they were no longer useful. The small amounts of money, the food, the items taken from victims, they were not the goal. They were just part of the process. And that is what made the case so difficult to fully understand. Because there was no clear, logical payoff. No single driving motive that explained everything. Just a pattern, repeated again and again, until it ended. Now, as the trial approaches, one thing is certain. This case will not be remembered just for what happened, but for how it unfolded, how people reacted, how assumptions were made, and how easily perception can distort reality. Because in the beginning, many people saw what they wanted to see, not what was actually there. As the trial approaches, the entire case begins to settle into something heavier than just headlines. Because once all the noise fades, what remains is simple. 2 people are dead. Several others almost didn't make it. And one person is responsible. Everything else, online debates, opinions, sympathy, outrage, becomes secondary. But even then, people still try to understand it. They ask the same questions over and over. Why? What was the real motive? Was it money? Was it trauma? Was it control? Or was it something that cannot be easily explained? Because when you look at the outcome, there is no logical gain. She did not walk away with life-changing money. She did not build anything from it. She did not escape into a better life. She destroyed lives for things that, on the surface, seem small. Food, cash, temporary control over a situation. And that is what makes it so unsettling. Because most people expect something big behind something this extreme. But sometimes there isn't. Experts reviewing the case pointed out something important. When someone repeatedly commits acts like this without a clear, consistent reward, it often means the reward is internal. Control, power, the ability to decide what happens to someone else, the ability to end a situation on their own terms. That becomes the pattern. Not money, not survival, control. And once that pattern is established, it can escalate, which is exactly what happened here. The dosages increased, the frequency increased, the confidence increased, until eventually it crossed the line into death. And even then, the behavior did not stop immediately. That is why many believe, if she had not been caught when she was, there would have been more victims, because nothing in her pattern suggested she was slowing down. If anything, she was becoming more comfortable, more efficient, more detached, and that brings the focus back to something people often overlook. The victims, because in all the discussion, all the analysis, all the speculation, it is easy to forget who paid the price. These were not criminals. These are not people expecting danger. They were men going on dates, meeting someone new, trusting a normal situation, having a drink, eating food, spending time, and then, without warning, their bodies shut down. No fight, no defense, no understanding of what was happening, just confusion, then darkness, and for some of them, no waking up. That is what makes this case particularly disturbing. Not just what happened, but how easily it happened, how ordinary everything looked on the surface. A drink, a date, a conversation, and then everything changes. There is also another layer to this story that people continue to talk about, and it has nothing to do with the crime itself. It is about perception, how quickly people formed opinions, how quickly sympathy was given, based on appearance, before facts were even fully known. And then how quickly that sympathy disappeared. When the image changed, that part of the story forces a different kind of reflection, because it shows how easily people can be influenced by what they see, instead of what is real. And in cases like this, that can be dangerous, because it shifts focus away from what actually matters. Accountability, truth, and justice. As for Kim Soyoung, she now faces the full weight of the legal system. Multiple charges, a trial that will determine the rest of her life. And regardless of the outcome, one thing is already clear. There is no version of this where things go back to normal. Too much has happened. Too many lives have been affected. Too many questions have been raised. And maybe the most unsettling part of all is this. There is no dramatic moment that signaled danger. No obvious warning that something was wrong. Just small signs, strange behavior, inconsistencies, things that fell off, but were easy to ignore in the moment, until it was too late. And that leaves one final thought. Sometimes, the most dangerous situations are not the loud ones, not the ones that look threatening, but the quiet ones, the ones that seem normal, the ones that feel just slightly off, but not enough to walk away, because those are the moments where decisions are made. And sometimes, those decisions change everything. So whatever you take from this story, let be awareness. Pay attention to what feels wrong. Trust what does not make sense. And remember, not every danger looks dangerous at first. Stay aware, stay cautious, and stay safe.